Greetings, everyone. I hope you are fine. I hope you are doing well. If you are new here, I'm Olani Moloi, and in this channel, we always talk about African politics, African history, African business, African way of doing things. In other words, I can say the theme of this channel is to make Africans to believe in themselves. In this video, I just want to talk about the forms of capital that are appropriate for Africans. In other words, these skill sets that I'm going to talk about, or these forms of capital that I'm going to talk about, might help you to understand why skill set is so important. Why I'm so interested in talking about these forms of capital is because I've realized that there's a huge difference between the young people of today and the young people, for an example, in the 1970s, in the 1980s, in maybe 1900s in Africa or amongst Africans. Because right now, there's a trend going around that Africans are lazy, that South African people are lazy, and etc., and etc. That is why I always say history is important, because whenever we want to find out where things went wrong, we will always need history so that we can understand what is going on. There's something that we need to understand about the young people of the 1970s, or the people of the 1970s, maybe 50s, 1900s, and etc., even prior to colonialism. They depended upon themselves. So they didn't have to depend upon government prior to colonialism. Even during colonialism and during apartheid, during slavery, black people used to depend upon themselves, and they used to support one another. Because even today, we have this trend that black people don't support one another. But if you look at history back then, during colonialism, prior to colonialism, and so forth, black people used to support one another, because at that time they were used to know as an answer from the slave masters, from the colonialists, from the system. They were used to know as an answer. So that is why they had skill sets. They had something which the young people of today don't have. Why? Because the young people of today are now depending upon government than any other generation in the past. Why? Because the moment they told us that now we have independence in other countries in 1970s, 1960s, 1980s, in South Africa in 1994, then we started depending upon government, because we were now transitioning from slavery to this democracy thing, freedom thing, and etc. Then many people started depending upon government more than any other generation. So here is the difference. The young people of today don't have skill sets, don't have necessary skill sets. This is what is happening. But the young people in the 1970s, in the 1980s, had skill sets. Why? Because they had to depend upon themselves. That is why even right now, we still have, like, for an example, people in African countries or from other African countries who depend upon themselves. Why? Because they understand very well that they cannot depend upon their government, because their governments might be corrupt to the core. Then if you have realized that the government in a country where you are living is corrupt to the core, then it means you have to pull up your socks and start depending upon yourself. That is why I want to talk about these forms of capital that are more important than money. It doesn't mean money is not necessary, but you need something that can bring money consistently. Why? Because money cannot bring money without some of these forms of capital that I'm going to talk about. So the first capital that I want to talk about is a sewing machine. In other words, a sewing machine is an asset. Why a sewing machine? It's because recently I was talking to another gentleman, and we were talking about this sewing machine that back then, when we were growing up, most of the families or some families had this sewing machine, so that whenever maybe you have a problem with your trouser, you have a problem with your shirt, so that you can take it to them so that they can fix it. And we used to pay a reasonable amount of money. But what I like is that they used to make money with those sewing machines. Our grandmothers used to make money using, like for an example, a sewing machine. Then back then, I didn't see the importance. I was not aware about the importance of a sewing machine. But later on, I started realizing that the moment you sell this sewing machine, or the moment it gets broken, then the flow of money stops and we start struggling. That's when I realized that a sewing machine is very important and can be used as a form of capital, or is a form of capital, because it's a source of income. It brings money on the table. So once you have that money, then you can start buying other things. But here is the thing. The operator of this machine needed a skill set. In other words, they had to develop or improve their skill set in order to operate this machine, so that at the end of the day, you can do what customers are looking for. So that at the end of the day, you can make money. So in other words, this thing made our grandmothers to become professional, even though they didn't have professional education. Why? Because they were now business minded, even though they didn't have, like for an example, a business qualification or accountancy qualification, and etc. and etc. The most important thing is that they survive. So I can say, in order for us to make it in life without depending upon government, you need a skill set. For an example, if you are good when it comes to painting, then it means you need resources, painting resources. Even if you're not running a big business, but you need painting resources, so that those painting resources or painting equipment can bring consistent income. That's the most important thing. And again, if you're good when it comes to fixing cars, then it means you need a toolbox, so that you can fix cars continuously. Then at the end of the day, you will put money on the table, you will put bread on a table. Then other forms of capital that I want to talk about, for an example, is livestock. We can talk about goats, we can talk about cows, we can talk about chickens, and etc. and etc. These were other forms of capital as well. Why? Because if you have a cow, then you are certain that you'll also get milk. Me personally, I grew up in farms. So around 5 p.m., 4 p.m., 6 p.m., we had to separate the calves from their mothers, so that the following day, before we go to school, so that we can start milking those cows. For an example, if it happens that day, maybe we had milk in abundance, then we would reserve some milk for us, then we would sell other milk to other people as well. Then as a result, we're able to make money, so that we can, like for example, have pocket money, and etc. and etc. This is another form of capital. That is why when you complain about, like for an example, oppression, slavery, colonialism, is because we understand very well that land is important. Because if you have land, if you have space, then you can be able to, like for an example, have a car. Even if you don't have a degree, even if you don't have a diploma, even if you don't have all these things, technological skill and etc. But if you have a car, then it means you can learn how to multiply this car. And as a result, you will develop a skill set. And the other thing, again, you can learn how to treat this cow, how to protect this cow. You can learn what kind of environment is preferable to this car. Then at the end of the day, you develop a skill set. Even when it comes to sheep, a sheep will give you meat, but will also give you wool as well. That is why these forms of capital are so important. Even when it comes to chickens, they give you meat, but at the same time, they also give you eggs. Then if you have it in abundance, you can sell some to other people. The most important thing is to have a skill set. Even if it's not about cows, even if it's not about livestock, the most important thing that young people of today need is a skill set, a practical skill set, not theory. Because right now we are fooled that you have to go to like a university, you have to go to college, you have to go to these expensive schools. But at the end of the day, you fail to convert that certificate into a skill set. So it would be important for people to go to tertiary to study courses that are related to something that they've been doing for the rest of their lives, since they were 5 years old, since they were 6 years old, since they were like 10 years old. That would be beneficial. But this happened as a result of a system, as a result of the educational system and many other things. That as a result, people were trapped so that they can continue depending upon government, even when it's not necessary. I'm not saying you shouldn't be depending upon government, but in other words, you have to limit yourself. In other words, you have to make sure that you have a skill set that you can use out there to bring money consistently or to put bread on a table consistently. Even if it's a small amount of money, it's fine. But as long as it's consistent, everything is cool, everything is good. And the other thing that old people had back then is the garden, a vegetable garden, even if it's not a big one. But most of the household, if not every household, they had a garden, a vegetable garden. So in other words, a garden can also be used as a form of capital, because you use your seed, you sow your seed, then at the end of the day, you end up harvesting. And the most important thing is to develop a skill in a garden, because sometimes we think like working in a garden, knowing about land is not important. It is important because you have to gain a skill set. You have to teach yourself about how to prepare the soil and how to work the land and when to plant, what kind of, like for an example, plants or vegetables you can plant in your area or in your locality. These are the things that you need to learn as well. Then as a result, you end up harvesting. And when you harvest, or when you end up harvesting in abundance by the grace of God, then you end up selling some. Then as a result, you end up making money. Why? Because back then, people didn't have these things. Why? Because the primary focus was money. No, it was all about taking care of themselves. But whenever they would harvest in abundance, then they would sell some. Then as a result, they ended up making money, and then they ended up investing. So that is why the people during those days, they were able to make money more than the current generation. Why? Because the current generation is unemployed, but not just unemployed without a skill set. So I made this video because I would like to encourage African people to start developing skill sets, investing in a skill set. It can be, like for an example, it can be sewing, it can be plumbing, it can be painting, it can be, like for an example, gardening. It can be, like for an example, many other things. In other words, you need to start doing something right now. You need to start doing something. You must have a skill set that will make people to see you as a service provider or as a supplier. That's the most important thing. I'm not saying you should not depend upon government, but while depending upon government, you must have a skill set that can put even one bread a week on a table. It's fine. I don't know what you think about this topic, and if maybe you have your own views, something to say, maybe you want to add something on what I've already said, then you can go ahead and put your comment on the comment section, and please consider being respectful. Thank you very much.